All right. Well, again, thank you to everyone for joining us for this Kentucky Chamber webinar. That is a 2021 session wrap-up discussion with our legislative leaders. I'm John Cox, Manager of Public Affairs at the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, and joining us today from the 17th District, we have Senate Majority Floor Leader Damon Thayer from Georgetown. From Louisville, we have Senate Minority Floor Leader Morgan McGarvey of the 19th Senate District. From the First House District out in Western Kentucky, we have House Majority Leader Stephen Rudy of Paducah, and from the 44th House District in the Shively area of Jefferson County is House Minority Floor Leader Joni Jenkins. Welcome to all of our legislative leaders today, and I'm going to let the lady from Jefferson 44 kick things off. Leader Jenkins, when you look back at the 2021 legislative session, what letter grade would you give the General Assembly as a whole this year, and why would you grade it in that fashion?
Oh my gosh, that's kind of hard. I jokingly told somebody the other day that we've been out of session long enough that the twitch in my right eye has stopped. You know, I think from the minority standpoint, we would give it probably a C-. Some good things did happen, but we spent a whole lot of time on what I think was a misguided direction of attacking the powers of the governor. I think a lot of that stuff is going to end up in court. We're still waiting for that to wind its way back. And so I think that was a big waste of time. In a time when we were hopefully coming out of the pandemic, I felt like it was a great time to really help individuals and businesses to get ready for a post-pandemic economy. So I think there were some missed opportunities.
Leader Rudy, same question.
Well, I would grade it as a B+. I mean, we accomplished a lot more than I ever imagined that we would. When the session began, we all said we'll pass a budget. And clearly the voters of Kentucky spoke in last election. They wanted something to do, wanted the General Assembly to take up executive overreach. And I disagree with Leader Jenkins on this respectfully, but you know, the people that I heard from and we heard from across the state was one person shouldn't be making all these decisions during pandemic, and the legislature is the policy-making body. What are you guys going to do about it? But I think we were able to accomplish a lot of things in a 30-day session, including passing a budget that was a tough thing to do in a short session. But we were able, with the leadership of our new A&R chairman, Jason Petrie, and working with our friends in the Senate to pass a continuation budget with necessary modifications. And we were able to accomplish a lot more things beyond that, things that have been talked about for a long time, including a pension reform bill that Ed Massey led the way for on TRS pensions. That was a compromise bill. We did a lot of things with hospital funding with Danny Bentley and Brandon Reed worked on that, the investments we made in broadband. But at the end of the session, there were always things that we didn't get to that I wish we could have. So, but I give it a solid B+, if not an A-.
All right, thank you. And in that same vein, Leader Thayer, as we get deeper and deeper into a legislative process each year, sessions kind of tend to take on their own individual identity. So when we look back at 2021, just to answer this a little differently, how do you think people will describe this session, or what was the identity that KYGA 21 kind of took by the end of it?
We got 60 days of work done in 30 days. I mean, literally every day was intense. The sheer volume of bills we were dealing with and the enormity of the issues. And, you know, look, I would say to Leader Jenkins, she must not be grading on a curve to give us a C-. I mean, my God, we did more for her city than any other region of the state. You know, we passed Senate Bill 4 in a bipartisan effort to limit no-knock raids. And that came out of an unfortunate incident that happened in her town. And one of the things that isn't being talked about, but I think will ultimately be a hallmark of what happened this session, is Senate Bill 100. President Stivers' incredibly bipartisan bill that he Senator McGarvey and Senator Adams worked on for the better part of last year into this year to help reinvigorate the west end of Louisville. I give it an A. We did exactly what we said we were going to do. We got a mandate last November to reel in this out of control governor who continues to be way behind the curve. I mean, even his liberal allies in New York, Connecticut, and California have announced reopening dates, and he's still messing around with an unnecessary mask mandate. You know, we overrode 29 of his vetoes. I do agree with Leader Jenkins that some of these bills are ending up in court because we know from his time at Attorney General that Andy Beshear likes to sue. He's the most litigious governor I've ever had to deal with. He shows a remarkable disrespect for the General Assembly and the people's branch of government. And, you know, we said we were going to come in and reel him in. So I think people are going to remember us this session for getting a lot done in 30 days to help reinvigorate the economy. We supported our signature industries, bourbon and horse racing. And we made some remarkable strides on school choice and teacher pensions. Neither one of those bills went far enough. But as I've learned during my time in Frankfurt, you don't give up the good for the sake of the perfect. And I think it was a session of consequence where we achieved some really substantive accomplishments.
For that, and Leader McGarvey, same question.
Looking erudite,
was the session of
erudite with those law books in the background.
You look very horsey, Leader, there with all the stuff there. This is the
problem.
I've been
called worse.
I know. John, when you make me go after Damon, this is the problem. It's Happy Chandler once said, "I feel like the mosquito who flew into the nudist colony. I hardly know where to start." And there's a lot to unpack in what he said.
Just trying to tee it up for you, my friend.
I want to know the session where Damon wouldn't give a grade when he talks give an A when he talks about grading on a curve. But I liked Professor Rudy sitting there very professorial, giving B+. I thought that was nice. Look, this session reminds me of the TV show The Wire. I used to love watching The Wire. My two favorite characters on The Wire were Omar the Hitman and Stringer Bell, who was one of the main characters and an interesting and complex guy. He gave this speech where he said, "I need some 40-degree days." And what he said basically is, 40-degree days when people were calm and nothing was really happening. People were really upset when things were really cold, and people were really upset and crazy when things were hot. I can tell you from the minorities' perspective, we had exactly 0 40-degree days this legislative session. We were either doing some really good things, as Leader Jenkins mentioned, and I'm happy with some of the investments we've made in the state in getting Kentuckians clean drinking water and connecting Kentuckians to the internet, investing in infrastructure and future possibility with the funds made possible by President Biden and Congressman Yarmuth and the American Rescue Plan. I think that you saw us come together in a bipartisan way with the governor and really allocate a bunch of that money in a good way that will benefit all Kentuckians. So we were doing some really good things. And I do think that we came together. I don't think it was a mandate, this election. And I think if we're just going to talk about this politically, that we know what happens in legislative races, that presidential elections are the biggest predictor of what happens in legislative races. I look at one of my members who lost, a super great guy, Johnny Ray Turner. There were negative mailers sent out against him. Those negative mailers did not mention Governor Beshear and his executive power. They were all about the presidential race or about matters dealing with policing and responses there too. So I don't think there was an election mandate on this, but here's my problem with it. We're talking about institutions, not people. We're talking about the institution of the legislature taking powers away from the office of the governor. And we can talk all we want to about whether that's a good or a bad thing. But the reality is the Constitution says the legislature can't come in until the first Tuesday following the first Monday in January and has to be gone by March 30th in an odd numbered year, April 15th in an even numbered year, and can only meet for a set number of days in between. That is why we have a strong executive to make these decisions, not just in a time of pandemic, but in a time of disaster, an ice storm, a flood, a tornado, heaven forbid, an earthquake. That's why we have these. Well, the most times in the last 20 years we've declared a state of emergency, which has lasted for more than 30 days, is for drought. And that's what the executive does. We don't need to call the General Assembly back into session to decide whether or not it's been raining. And I think that if we're going to have this conversation about executive power, then we really must do something about the way the legislature meets. Now, there was a constitutional amendment that passed the legislature this session that'll go before the voters in 2022. But what happens if it doesn't pass? And we just saw people reject the idea that district court judges get longer terms, and how they responded to changing government and the Constitution in the 2020 election. What happens if the legislature doesn't pass? So I think we have made some missteps just because of the way our government is organized constitutionally. And I think it was a political reaction, but I don't know that it was a mandate.
Thank you, Leader McGarvey. Along that same line, you mentioned the American Rescue Plan, and we know language passed to require more involvement from the legislature when it comes to allocating some of those federal funds. I want to turn to Leader Rudy. Can you elaborate a little on what it was done toward the end of session to spend some of these monies, and maybe talk about what's left on the table that we still need to figure out? I know it was a good chunk of money.
I think we spent half of the funds that were allocated to the Commonwealth directly to running state government. I know there are some other funds that are trickling through in that bill as well. For instance, education funds, we did not touch those. Those will flow directly to the Department of Education. But, we felt it was important that we, the policymaking branch, the Constitution is clear. The General Assembly is in charge of appropriating the funds, the taxpayers' funds. And we take that job very seriously. And I would push back on Leader McGarvey's comments about the fact that we're in a limited amount of time. That's what this country's about. It's about freedom. We don't need to be up there passing laws nonstop, constantly. This country was built on that. That's why I say that we are the most powerful branch, because that power is spread across 138 of us, and it's limited to the amount of times we can enact that power. Look, when previous governors were given these executive authorities during states of emergency, we all envisioned, and those General Assemblies envisioned those things that he was talking about: earthquakes, droughts, things that clearly the General Assembly shouldn't have to be called in for. But when you're talking about a year-long, if not more, I think we're now in the 13th month of this, 14th, of a global pandemic, and one person has ultimate say on all the decisions, give me a break. The voters, the people of Kentucky, do not want a dictatorship. That is what this country was founded on, revolting against that type of mentality. But I was very cautious. I was very concerned about the way Washington, D.C. is spending money. But look, the fact of the matter is they passed it. The money is sent to Frankfurt. And if we said, no, we're not going to take it, it's not like the taxpayers are going to get a check back in their pocket. So we decided to appropriate that money and make the best use of it, and make sure that language was in there that the General Assembly would be involved in that.
Leader Jenkins, anything to add to that? Were you satisfied with the way the money has been spent thus far, and anything you want to add on that?
Well, I will follow up on Leader Rudy. It came late in the session. Certainly would have been great to have more time to debate it and talk about how we could get the most bang for the buck, but we had to act quickly. And I think I noted on the floor in the last 45 minutes, we appropriated $1.4 billion, which was a little bit breathtaking. I anticipate there'll be a special session called to spend the rest of the money, which we are the appropriating branch. So I agree with that. I hate that, we'll have to go back into a special to do that, but that's the way the rules are written. I would assume that the governor is waiting to see what else Congress is going to act on. There's, let's talk about an infrastructure bill with a lot of money attached to it. So while I know the chamber, one of their big goals was a gas tax increase, I think it all worked out well that we're going to see what the feds are going to do in regards to infrastructure, which would allow us some time to think about how we would structure something if we do think there's still a need for an increase in the road fund, how we can do that in a way that is fair and equitable. I represent a district of middle income and lower income folks, and the gas tax is regressive for them because most of them cannot afford a hybrid or an electric car. And we know that the industry is headed toward getting away from fossil fuel cars. So I would hate to see lower income and middle income people bearing the brunt of the road fund. So it gives us some time to talk about ways to structure an increase that is fair to everybody.
Thanks for that. Leader Thayer, do you see a special session? Is that something you think will occur, and when, if at all, if you've had any discussion with anyone on this? And what will we address?
First of all, I'd like to note the historic moment that just occurred where Representative Jenkins and I agree about the gas tax. And I would like to also note we appropriated $2 billion in the road fund. So I don't see any road contractors going broke over the next year. I think there's plenty of work for them to do and plenty of money for them to pay for it. So thank you, Leader Jenkins, for agreeing with me that I think this is a bad time to raise the tax on gas for the working people of Kentucky. As far as a special session, I mean, I'll still be shocked if Andy Beshear calls us back in, but you never know. Maybe the fact that he got booed at the Kentucky Derby on Saturday will maybe bring him back to a sense of reality and realize that he has to deal with the people's branch of government. I think I'm sure that the gas tax proponents will try to get him to add the gas tax to the call. It won't have as steep a hurdle in terms of the vote threshold, 60 votes in the House necessary, 23 in the Senate during the a regular session in an odd numbered year, but it would only require 20 in the Senate and 51 in the House, and that's probably a more doable figure. So we'll see if he adds that to the call. I don't think it's pressing enough to have a special session for the gas tax. I won't support it, but if he adds it, I'm sure that he'll work with the folks who are advocates for that and get the votes. Then there's about $1 billion or so left under the Biden-Bucks plan. You know, the plan that our kids and grandkids will be paying for generations to come. But like Leader Rudy said, if DC sending it down, I guess we are left with no choice but to go ahead and appropriate it. And we did, we did put that out there that, or as a reminder to the governor that if he's going to spend money, he has to call us in. Unlike last June when he borrowed $800 million for the unemployment insurance fund. So I would suspect that some of that money is on the table, but frankly, we don't really need a special session. A lot of that money doesn't become available to us until next year. So we could deal with it when we return on January 4th. So I don't really see the urgency, but he's the one who gets to make the call. And maybe he'll start talking to us to see if there is going to be some sort of agreement on what we can do in 5 days. Remember, it takes 5 days to pass a bill. And it would be helpful if he didn't do what Matt Bevin did and call us into a session without an agreement. We'll see if he wants to try to work with us on that. Yes, yes, McGarvey. I just criticized the Republican governor. So
I remember that Monday night of I think it was December 18th of Christmas week when we all got called in on 4 hours notice. I don't even think I think Rudy was the house he had to measure to make sure that you could make it to Frankfort in time. So.
Yeah, Leader McGarvey, anything to add on prospects of a special session and what you think would need to be addressed?
Yeah, just a couple of things. I think you see the agreement of the four leaders here that the legislature is the body that appropriates money. And so I think you see all four of us wanting the legislature, again, not Democrats, not Republicans, not individuals, but the institution of the legislature to continue to fulfill its role in appropriating money. And we would like to be a part of that. I would push back on one thing that Leader Rudy said while agreeing with almost everything else he said, and that is, that we want one person in charge. We don't want one person in charge. I don't want a full-time legislature, but I will point out that the legislature did just meet from January through March and did not actually undo many of the governor's mandates and orders. And that was the opportunity for us to do that. And so I pushed back on that just a little bit, that we did come in and have power. The question is, how do we, we did some.
He sued.
We did some, but we didn't actually end anything while we were in session. We put some parameters around it, and those parameters survive potentially the lawsuit when we're out of session. I think that the special session is the reality. We're still waiting for guidance from the federal government on exactly how all of this money can be spent. And I think Leader Jenkins pointed out that we're expecting potentially more money to come. And Leader Thayer is correct. We do not have to spend this money by a certain, well, we do have to spend it by a certain date, but it's after we meet in the 2022 session. So there is no clock that we're up against in terms of losing the funding if we don't have a special session. So I think for having a special session, if we get the guidance, particularly if we get a little bit more money, then and we can reach an agreement, then I would like to see us come in so that money can begin to get to work for Kentuckians. I think that's the clock we're up against, is how quickly can we get that guidance? Do we know what money's coming? And we can actually make it work for Kentuckians. And if there's a chance for us to do that, then I think that's why we have a special session, is so that the legislature can come in and in 5 days with that prearranged agreement, as Leader Thayer mentioned, turn it around and get it to work for people who need it most.
Fair enough. And sort of an open-ended question, I guess, in the vein of, economic recovery, and you can answer either as a state or, as in your individual communities, but how do you see things progressing at this point, and what do we need to continue to do to get people, vaccinated, back to work, everything that goes along with that? And I'll turn it over. Anyone that wants to jump in here can please.
Back to work is so important. I mean, this unemployment debacle, we actually, 3 of the 4 of us debated this on KET a few weeks ago. End of the day, I don't care who's to blame. It should have been fixed long ago. And hopefully strides are now being made with the regional offices being open. But the fact of the matter is, where there's no incentive for people to get work, every business that I know is trying to hire someone. And then the workers are just not there. They're not coming back to work. I think it's not even, I believe tomorrow is the first day that you're going to even to draw unemployment, that you're going to be required to go back and go out and look for work. There are plenty of jobs out there. The number one way to get this economy rolling again, and amazingly, it has rolled beyond what we expected in this pandemic and during these times, is to get these mandates over as they were done in House Joint Resolution 77 and get this economy reopened that he vetoed and we overrode and now he's sued on. It's get the people back to work, get this thing going, get this pandemic behind us. It is very serious, but we have taken all the precautions. Most of the states around us are lifting mandates. I talked to a restaurateur in Paducah who says that there are hundreds of this particular franchise all across the nation, and only two won't allow their buffet to be opened again. And guess which 2 they are? The 2 that are in Kentucky. It is ridiculous what this guy has done to the economy and to the businesses. And we have addressed it. And I believe the Supreme Court's going to get around to addressing these emergency powers that we have tried to rein in sometime in June. Nothing like the judicial to work in a quick and fashion. That is just as almost as frustrating as the executive branch to me.
I agree.
Jump in here.
I agree with Leader Rudy.
Yeah,
I was at the
jump
gym
in
this
here.
morning, and while I was on the treadmill, I was talking to Daniel Harrison, who most people know, DH from Country Boy here in Georgetown, and they can't find enough people to work. So that even if the governor lifted the capacity limits and we went back to normal, which he should do and should have been done weeks ago, they can't put out more tables because they don't have the people to work, because we're paying people to stay at home and sit on their couch and watch Netflix. That's the problem. So you got the problem where deserving people for the last year haven't been able to get their checks, unless, of course, they were the lieutenant governor's hairdresser or someone who worked in the unemployment insurance office. And by the way, that thing needs to be fully investigated, and we'll see where that goes in terms of misfeasance, malfeasance, nonfeasance on behalf of this administration. But then on the other end, you got people who are able-bodied and should be going back to work, but the Biden administration and the liberals who run Washington, D.C. now are giving them incentive just to stay home. That's going to be the lag on this economy getting back to work and at full capacity.
Leader McGarvey.
I'll jump in here. And obviously, I've tried this whole time not to make the pandemic partisan. I think people and businesses have really suffered. And right now, it's easy for us to sit here in April of 2021 and forget how scared everyone was in March and April of 2020 and what that looked like and how little we knew at the time. Yes, I want people to get back to work. Yes, we need to do better in unemployment and make sure that people are getting the benefits that they're owed. And there have been some real problems there. And there's no point in finger pointing anymore about that. There's enough mistakes going back years and even now, right, that need to be fixed. We need to fix those. And of course, the other thing that hadn't been mentioned, we want people back in school full time. I can tell you, sitting here in Jefferson County where the schools aren't open full time, that we want people back in schools. We want people back at work. We want the economy open. We don't want to stay in a pandemic. To that end, get vaccinated. 1.8 million Kentuckians have been vaccinated thus far. Leader McConnell stressed again yesterday in his press conference, everyone get vaccinated. I got a text yesterday from a buddy who's a pharmacist here in Louisville saying that they had several extra shots available that would go bad yesterday if they didn't use them. Send it out. Let people know to come in. If you are an adult and you want to get vaccinated in Kentucky right now, the opportunity is there. And let's make sure that we do all get back to work, that we do open up our schools, that we do it safely, and let's encourage as many people to do that as possible.
And I'd like to weigh in that when we look at our numbers compared to numbers across the South, Kentucky has fared much better in fatalities. And if as a state we're going to err, I like that we erred on the side of safety for our constituents. And I also think that, we're at a point in our economy that if you're making more money being unemployed in a system that we know is broken, so many people are having difficulties getting those benefits that they've earned. Maybe we need to relook at our whole economy, and that if the free market works for entrepreneurs and corporations, maybe the free market should work for our employees as well. And perhaps we are entering into an economy that's going to demand a higher wage for workers. I always talk about, I'm older than anybody else on this panel. I grew up in a time when the kids I went to school with, dads bagged groceries at Kroger's and Winn-Dixie. Winn-Dixie's not even here anymore. And you know what? They were able to raise a family decently on those wages. That doesn't happen now. So maybe our economy is headed in a slightly different direction on that.
John, I'd like to respond. Generally, when corporations and entrepreneurs do well, so do the working people. It takes entrepreneurs and corporations to employ people. And I would argue right now that there is no such thing as a government mandated minimum wage, because businesses everywhere are actually having to increase their pay to potential employees in order to, and current employees, to keep them and to hire new ones. And that's generally what happens in a market-based economy. The last thing we need to do in an economic recovery is for the government to mandate a higher minimum wage. Water will take its natural course, and that's exactly what happens. And I'd also like to point out that Florida and Texas have completely reopened with fewer cases and vaccinations. And I just wish we had a governor like that who would lift this mask mandate, let businesses open up, and let people figure out for themselves. Look, if you're afraid, and that's legitimate, you can stay home. People have figured out how to live and work remotely for the last year. If you're afraid, stay home. If you need to go out, you can wear a mask if that makes you feel better. But let me tell you, there were 51,000 people at the Kentucky Derby on Saturday. I was one of them. And there were about 50,200 people not wearing a mask. People are done with this. That's why there was loud booing that could be heard on the NBC broadcast of the end of the Kentucky Derby of this governor. People are done over it, over him and his leadership style. Open up the economy, let the schools go back, get this unemployment insurance debacle taken care of. Let's make sure that the people working inside are not illegally getting monies that they shouldn't be getting, while other people who deserve them are not. And let's let this eagle soar. We were at less than 4% unemployment before this pandemic. And I'm not sure under this governor's policies, we're going to get back there anytime soon.
But before Leader Thayer starts singing and waving the American flag, I want to say a couple of things. One, here it goes. I think it's slightly ironic to be talking about opening up the economy while talking about attending the largest public event held in America since the pandemic started. And that was the Kentucky Derby. And we were able to do that in part because of how we have done things safely. And we want the economy open. We want people back to work. We want kids in school. We want it done safely. We want it into this. And I think you do that through safe and effective leadership. As it goes to the economy, yeah, you know what? We need higher wages for workers in this country. They have not kept pace with inflation. I'm sitting right here downtown in my office. One of the places open is right across the street is Chipotle. And I talk to the general manager and the staff most of the days. I go over there and grab something and bring it back to my desk. And they're having trouble finding workers right now. And he says one of the reasons they're having trouble finding workers is because of wages. He also told me that if they figured it out and if Chipotle raised the price of a burrito 43 cents, they could afford to pay every person who works in Chipotle at least $15 an hour, and the company wouldn't lose a cent. These are the types of things that we need to be talking about so that everyone can share in the economy we hope to truly bring back.
All right, I want to go to a question that my colleague Kate Shanks asked about unemployment insurance issues. We did a lot to deal with those issues, paying off the loan, setting up requirements for a new system to protect us from fraud. And we see Leader Thayer with his American flag right there. Do you all see the need for further work on UI issues in future sessions and improving that system?
Absolutely. We in one of the UI bills that we passed this year included a task force. I think it's the only task force that passed both chambers. We will begin that task force in the coming weeks, and we will look at it. It'll be a bipartisan task force. Russell Weber did a great job carrying that bill. I fully anticipate that he will be involved in that task force very heavily as the chairman of the committee that most of those things go through. But yes, we will continue to look at those, and I think that we hope to have good policy to come out, and hopefully good bipartisan policy to come out of that task force in the next the 2022 General Assembly.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, with unemployment, none of us want fraud in unemployment. Let's look at some of the fraud that occurred. I mean, there is some of the fraud that occurred just because so many people who signed up used 1234 or 2020 as their 4-digit PIN. And there were thieves who were able to go in and steal that information. There's some fraud. We need to do a better job protecting against some of those things. We need to make sure that we have an unemployment system, like so many of our systems, whether it's getting a driver's license in Kentucky or applying for unemployment. These are the types of functions of state government that we need to fund at all times so they're available whenever we do need them.
And the entire system, the software and the system on which it runs is very much outdated. When the pop-up was here in Louisville, I went to help out and was amazed at the computer screens. I had a little, trigger back to my college days and working on a DOS computer, because it looked exactly the same way as it did at UK in the 1970s. So, investment into that, which I think is going to happen, should solve some of our problems, but we need to continuously look at it to make sure that the rates that employers are paying in is correct and appropriate, and that we set up systems for people who truly need the help to get it, while making sure that there is less likely for the ability for people to hack into it or steal somebody else's benefits.
All right, changing gears here. I want to talk a little bit about the initial census data that was released for Kentucky about a week or so ago. We are maintaining the same number of congressional seats at 6, and our overall growth rate from 2010 is about 3.6% increase from 2010. But between 2000 and 2010, we grew at a faster rate of about 7.4% as opposed to 3.6% in this most recent decade. I'll start with you, Leader Thayer. How do you interpret this data? Is it fair to say, we're not growing quite as fast as we were before? And are we doing enough in Kentucky to entice people and businesses to move to our state?
Well, we were before the pandemic hit, and also a change in philosophy from the governor. I mean, one thing you can say about Matt Bevin, and you can say bad things, you can say good things, and both of them would be true. But on the good side, he was the greatest salesman this Commonwealth has had since Martha Lane Collins brought Toyota just down the street from me here in Georgetown. We brought in a lot of new companies and billions in new investment. And that's obviously, changed. We know that the price of real estate and homes are going up. The real estate market here in Georgetown is incredibly hot. We grew over the 10 years at half the rate the country did. Not bad, but you'd think we could do better. I think we're going to see when the county numbers come out that the growth occurred in Northern Kentucky, Lexington, Louisville, Bowling Green, Owensboro, in the urban and suburban areas of the state. And I think we're going to see confirmed population flight from Western Kentucky and Eastern Kentucky to basically along the interstates, I-65, I-75, I-64. And that's going to be an interesting redistricting challenge for both the House and the Senate, especially when you have the large numbers that we have in the Republican supermajorities. We know the size of a Senate district now is going to be 118,574. We can go plus or minus 5%. So a district at the high end can be 124,502, and at the low end it can be 112,646. And you can extrapolate the same numbers for the House. We know that the mean is going to be around 45,000 people in the House of Representatives, and then you can go up 2,500, 2,250, something like that, and down that same number. But we can't really start on redistricting until we get the county by county numbers. Right now, we know that in the Senate, we have split Kenton, Jefferson, and Fayette. We know that we're pretty sure we're going to be able to split Boone and Warren. Due to growth, those two counties will have more than the required population for a Senate district. So we're going to go from 3 to 5 counties to split. It's nice to get this number and in reapportionment to know that we keep our 6 congressional districts and interesting trends that we're seeing around the country. But beyond that, we're all of us, all 138 are waiting with bated breath to get the final census numbers on a county by county and precinct level. And obviously everything's been delayed because of the pandemic, and we're told maybe September or October. If you want to talk about the need for a special session, that's what we need a special session for in November or December to come in and redo the maps for the House, the Senate, and the United States House of Representatives. And it certainly would be my hope that Governor Beshear would see the need for that, because if he doesn't, we're going to have to come in January and move the filing deadline and do redistricting in the early days of the 2022 legislative session.
Before we jump into the redistricting part of this discussion, and Leader McGarvey and Leader Jenkins, I will give you all an opportunity to speak on this, but Leader Rudy, it's an interesting point Leader Thayer makes about the more urban areas growing and folks seemingly leaving the more rural areas. I mean, how do we address that? How does, being in a more rural district, how do we attract more businesses, more opportunities in those areas?
What we did last year, this last session with the broadband investment is so key to that, and what that's going to do to help rural Kentucky. What we did with the rural hospital loans, those rural hospitals are such an economic engines in all these rural communities as well. But one thing I would like to point out, tax policy is so key. And Leader Thayer hit on it. All those areas with the growth, with the exception of Warren County, are nowhere near the Tennessee border. And Warren County has some different things going for it with WKU and some of the other things that have gone on there. But, without a personal income tax, without a corporate tax, right there across the Tennessee border, that is so enticing for people along that border to pick up and move. There's no river, there's no boundary. I mean, literally, people in my district in Fulton County are moving across the street to have zero income tax versus a 5% income tax. Bentonville, Arkansas built one of their super centers in Fulton County when the county lost 10% population, one census to the next. And you don't think Walmart's tracking that stuff? And guess what that thing's full of? Tennessee cars. People can come over there and enjoy lower sales tax and no sales tax on groceries and go back and live with no income tax. It's the best of both worlds for a taxpayer. And what we have to deal with tax policy as a whole. We made major strides 4 years ago. But I mean, the next key to this is doing local tax reform and hopefully lowering the personal income tax a little bit more to entice the people to stay and make investments in Kentucky.
And Leader Jenkins, you want to jump in there and kind of give your comments as to, how we grow our population in Jefferson County and beyond, in rural parts too?
Well, you may find it unexpected for somebody from the Louisville area to talk about the need to make sure that the economy booms everywhere, especially in Eastern and Western Kentucky. And I think we need to be looking at initiatives in those areas to make sure that there are jobs that pay well for the residents that live there. And when their young people leave their communities to go to universities and colleges in other areas, that there's incentive for them to come back and raise their families. And that starts with good education, and it starts with investing in those areas for economies that can sustain them and sustain jobs that folks will come back to.
Leader McGarvey, same question.
No, and I appreciate Leader Rudy's perspective on this. I think it's really important for everybody from around the state to hear from him and what he sees in his district. And don't want to lose him too many votes. He's one of my favorite guys in the House anyway to talk to, but it's good to hear that perspective. I want to go back to something that Leader Thayer said though about, this. Look, we did not lose population in Kentucky, and that's a great thing. We kept our 6 congressional seats. I think we all agree that's a really good thing. But, John, you start off with the question, is it fair to say that we didn't grow as fast? Well, it's not just fair to say, it's accurate to say we didn't grow as fast between 2010 and 2020 as we did between 2000 and 2010. And the reality is as much as sometimes we like to bring up the current governor, he was governor for exactly 3 weeks of the period the 10-year period where we measured this data. And I think what we need to do, we need to look at our tax policy, but we also need to look at some of our other policies. What signals are we sending to the country of what kind of state we are? How are we treating everyone who lives in Kentucky, who wants to work here, who wants to raise a family? How are we making it more enticing for people to come here? I think that getting broadband is so key. As Leader Rudy said, that's now the highway system, because you can work anywhere in the country and live in Paducah if you want to, if you've got a good, reliable connection to the internet. And it's also some of the policies that we've done involving higher education. We were one of the leaders in the late 90s and early 2000s in higher education. And we had a robust Bucks for Brains program that you see in some of these states that are picking up population. I mean, look at what they're doing at the University of Florida, at the University of Texas. Big public schools and states that are really well funded, that have incredible research missions, that are generating lots of opportunities and jobs out of there. So yeah, when we talk about tax policy, I think, there are businesses and corporations that look at that. We want jobs here as well. There's also an education mission, and there's also some other things on social policy I think we can do to attract people here as well.
So how likely is, some form of, as President Stivers likes to say, in terms of tax reform policy? We have a lot on our plate in terms of redistricting, you already mentioned, and, we'll have to do another budget in 2022, but is, tax reform something we think might be in the cards for next session?
The problem with tax reform next session is this federal law that we have appropriated a lot of the money. It's basically said you can't give tax relief in it. I mean, they put in some parameters around that. So, I know there's some litigation upon nationwide going on that. So we'll have to wait and see. But I think there is certainly a lot of interest, particularly in our caucus, I know, of getting, instead of raising more revenue for the Commonwealth, giving money back to the taxpayers where they can make the investment and let the free market dictate that.
I'll just throw in there, you guys need to listen to what Leader Rudy says because he's the majority leader, whereas I'm the minority leader. I can also say that just from where I look at it right now, at next session, if we have redistricting, a budget, and an election year, I think that throwing a tax reform package on the table that's truly a comprehensive tax reform package is a pretty heavy lift for the General Assembly.
I think Morgan is right, but it's easier to do.
Just stop there.
But if we don't do it in an even numbered year, we have to do it in a special session, which isn't going to happen. This governor is never going to call a special session on tax reform. Or you have to do it in an odd numbered year where you require a higher vote threshold. So, I'd love if we could get to no income tax like Tennessee, Florida, and Texas. But I think what's probably more realistic is we look at the Indiana model where they get their income tax down in the 3% range and then expand the consumption tax. Now, we did some of that a few years ago when we dropped the rates from 6 to 5% on the personal and the corporate tax. And then we expanded the sales tax to a number of services. And there was a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth initially, but I think it's worked out just fine, like often these things do. And I do think it's better for people and for businesses to let them figure out how to spend their money. And that's how a consumption tax works. And you look, what are two of the states that just for the second 10-year period in a row gained population and therefore clout in Congress by adding congressional seats? Texas and Florida. Texas gained 2 seats, Florida gained 1. That's after a 4-seat gain for Texas last time. And for the first time in history, the People's Republic of California actually lost a congressional seat. Hopefully they're going to lose their governor in a recall election by the end of this year. 10 years ago, for the first time in history, California did not gain a seat. This time, for the first time in history, they lost a seat. People are moving to Montana, which gained a seat. People are moving to Texas. People are moving to Florida. They're moving to Oregon too, which is sort of interesting. I'm not quite a good enough demographer to figure that one out. Apparently Portland's a great place, even though they continue to try to have violent protests on a regular basis. Maybe people are moving to the rural areas of Oregon. I don't know. But it's interesting to see these shifts every 10 years. And, people, they vote with their wallets and they move to states that have a less tax burden. And so back to a question you asked earlier, John, what could we do to have even greater population growth? We could adjust our tax policy. I think it's something we ought to do, but it takes a lot of courage to get the votes to do it. A lot of courage. It was a heavy lift when we did it a few years ago. And I would, and again, go back to agreeing with Morgan. It is a heavy lift, especially when you've got the double whammy of a budget, road plan, a budget and road plan. Let's put those all in sort of one basket, and then redistricting.
Leader Jenkins, anything? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I want Joni. I want to hear Joni.
Well, I think I've already talked about this, that
Okay.
that we cannot leave East Kentucky and West Kentucky behind, that we need to be looking at, and I think everything should be on the table. I think, taxes should be on the table. I agree with both of, I think everyone here has said that next year would be a really heavy lift for getting that done with redistricting and a budget. But I've been around for a long time. Every year since I was elected, we've talked about the need to reform our tax system, that our tax system is a 1950s model, and it's time to turn it in for a newer model, and we haven't done it. And there's probably 138 reasons why we haven't done it. But I think everything should be on the table as we look forward.
Leader McGarvey, sorry, I know you wanted.
She brought up one of the points I was going to bring up. How many blue ribbon task forces have we seen on tax reform? And what you've seen is across governors, multiple governors, across parties, across when Democrats controlled the legislature, since Republicans have controlled the legislature. You've seen calls for comprehensive tax reform. What hasn't happened until now is comprehensive tax reform. And maybe this is an example of where a special session would be a good idea to bring people in to focus just on this issue.
Well, I think we made major strides in 2018, and we don't want to lose sight of that. We had significant tax reform that mirrored much of the last Blue Ribbon Task Force's recommendation. The biggest problem we have right now is, even if we got the personal income tax down to zero, we have all these local entities that can only tax certain ways. And we need a constitutional amendment to address that as well, that had bipartisan support last year. And then we just, something happened on a day on the floor and we couldn't get the votes to muster it to get it across. Even though people supported the theory, whatnot, all that said and done, we must address local taxation as well as the entirety of the state.
We're about out of time here, but I definitely appreciate everyone's comments. Just a little lighter note, Leader Thayer, or any of you all can jump in on this, but what does kind of the interim session look like moving forward this summer? About the same schedule in terms of access and meetings with the public? What are we looking at?
It's going to be better, but still different. Meetings by appointment only. The committees are going to meet on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. No overlapping committees. People are going to still need to sign in, et cetera. Just out of an abundance of caution, really, because of the 300 to 400 LRC employees, I suppose. My hope is that by January 4th, we are back to full on normal. And in terms of topics, you're going to continue to see a lot of topics across all committees to look at the effects of COVID and the decisions that have been made in its management, really across all the committees.
Yeah, for better or for worse. Plenty of lessons learned amongst this pandemic. Well, I'll give you all each an opportunity for some closing thoughts and how you want to, summarize our discussion today or the session, or just words of encouragement moving forward. Start with you, Leader Rudy.
Well, there's so much to unpack and talk about. We could go on with these for hours. It's good to see my friends and be here with them in this format. We didn't even get into redistricting. I hope that this majority in the House can draw lines as good as the previous majority did, that got us up to 75 seats from what was in the minority back then when the lines were drawn. But, and not only the pandemic as we're still dealing with that, and to follow up on what Leader Thayer was talking about, but also the issue of security, which has never really been addressed in Frankfort at the Capitol. What went on in Washington, D.C. in January this year was a travesty. It was terrible. And it was, quite frankly, scary. I mean, I remember coming off the House floor and watching the news, and I've got dear friends that were evacuated. So I think we have to look at not just reaction after the pandemic, but also security that goes on at the Capitol. I know we passed a bill that President Salvers and Speaker Osborne worked on to address campus security as well. So we've got a lot of things that we'll be able to talk about. I guarantee you when the 2022 General Assembly convenes, we'll have new issues that we wouldn't even think about today. And I look forward to studying and hashing out some of these issues in the interim and working with these good folks on this format today and making Kentucky better in 2022.
Leader Jenkins.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be with you all today. And it was a great morning not to have to leave the house. It was storming in Shively this morning. So thank you for that. I think, as you can see from here, that there is much common ground among the parties. That what tends to get the most attention sometimes is when we get really contentious with each other and each side has firmly believed philosophies and that we express those. But most days on the floor of the House, Leader Rudy and I greet each other as we come in, and we greet each other warmly as we leave. And know that while we disagree, we try not to be very disagreeable about it. And I think Kentuckian is all the better for those types of civility, that civility that we show each other on the floor and off the floor. And I hope that we are moving with this new federal administration, that we're moving to a more civil discourse as we talk about our differences and we seek to find common ground.
Leader McGarvey.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm glad that Leader Jenkins and Leader Rudy brought that up as well. I always feel weird calling him Leader Rudy because everybody calls him Rudy as if it's his first name. So I always feel like I'm calling him by his first name, but no, it's great. And, Leader Thayer and I, we greet each other on the floor every day. We usually have some type of informal sock contest of who's got the better socks on. Sometimes we then fight on the floor, but we always shake hands when we walk off. And, I told you that last session, we didn't have a lot of calm days, and we didn't. But I thought the session ended on a high note. I thought you saw the parties working together across the aisle to get the American Rescue Plan dollars out, to get the West End Opportunity Partnership Zone through the legislature, to pass no-knock warrants, to pass bills that we really feel like will benefit all Kentuckians, whether you're urban, rural, Democrat, or Republican. Now, I'm not naive. I know 2022 is an election year, and I know that both parties will try to make some ground in that regard. But at the end of the day, I hope we build on the progress that we ended on this past session. Because as you've heard on this call, there are differences in how to get there, but there is unanimity and that we want Kentucky to grow and be the best place it can be for years to come.
Absolutely. And Leader Thayer.
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate the Chamber on its 75 years of advocacy in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Certainly enjoy working with you, John, as an alum of the Senate Republican majority and the rest of the team there on issues we agree on to help businesses in Kentucky. I think the Chamber should be very happy with the session it had. TRS reform, school choice, election reform, support of our signature industries, the cocktails to go bill, the direct ship cleanup bill. And, I think you want to talk about a huge success for the Chamber and a huge bipartisan success, Senate Bill 120. Here we are in the heels of the Kentucky Derby, where Kentucky was in the spotlight. The Kentucky Derby was the most viewed broadcast on NBC since the NFL divisional playoffs. And it had more viewers than any awards show yet this year, which I find a great deal of satisfaction in that. But, the Chamber was a great advocate for HHR. And that grassroots support was critical in getting the last couple of votes we needed to pass it. And, my friend Morgan McGarvey delivered all of the Senate Democrats to HHR, and we couldn't have passed it without Democrat votes. He delivered all of his caucus, and I'm eternally grateful to him for that. So, you know, I moved to Kentucky to work in the horse industry in 1992. I kind of got sidetracked into politics, and you know, two great pursuits, right? Politics and horse racing. I've kind of settled in here as a pretty natural Kentuckian. And I just really appreciate the Chamber's efforts on that. And I want to, you know, here in front of everybody, thank my friend Morgan for delivering those votes. It was critical. You saw the big purse increase announced at Churchill Downs, Kentucky Downs, Ellis Park. Purses are going up everywhere. The new Turfway Park is back under construction. These are good times for Kentucky's horse industry, and that's a $3 billion economic impact and 100,000 jobs. So that to me was the highlight of the session, but a session full of great highlights for businesses, and the Chamber should be proud in its role in helping make that happen.
We certainly appreciate that, and appreciate the partnership with all of you and your respective caucuses. And, you know, thank you all for taking the time again today. And we definitely, you know, look forward to further discussions and building on what we've accomplished this session, which we did think was very positive for business. So thank you all. I'm sure we'll be doing more of these panel discussions as we get into some of the summer months. So be sure you're following along with us on social media for future updates. And on behalf of the Kentucky Chamber, thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you all.